Okay, being recorded.
So everyone can see your screen, so I think you want to move your chat maybe? The chat box or no?
I don't think you can.
Are they going to see your chat box? Do you see
Do
his
you see my chat box?
Mm-hmm.
But everyone, but
presentation.
I think everyone has it. Okay, I can move it over now.
Is it blocking the presentation? Mm-hmm.
Oh, you don't see it?
No, I see it.
Oh, all right.
We do not see it.
Oh, can see it?
Okay.
Okay,
Great. Oh, that,
I mean, I'll skip it over.
no, that seems like a software thing.
Yeah, but it wouldn't. Yeah.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. This is the VTrans On-Road Bicycle Plan Phase 2 meeting, statewide meeting. I will go over the agenda for tonight. I'm Summer. I'm a planning coordinator at the Agency of Transportation and a project manager for this on-road bicycle plan and the facilitator for this evening's meeting. Thank you for participating in this meeting and to the RPC staff for assisting us as site facilitators. As everyone knows, we are, or hopefully people know, we're utilizing 10 of the 11 Regional Planning Commission sites along with a live web stream. The primary focus of today's meeting is to receive your comments on the on-road bicycle plan and the proposed project methodology. We will receive your comments as time permits. If we are unable to get to all your comments, we encourage you to submit your comments and questions in writing. I'm going to begin by checking in with each RPC site to understand what the attendance will be and the number of people wanting to speak. I ask each RPC site as I call on you to unmute your phone and let me know. Catherine in Scotney.
Hi, Summer. I just have one person other than myself. Currently, we don't intend to speak, but we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Michelle in Bennington.
Michelle, are you there? Could you speak? You seem unmuted from our end. No, perhaps not. Move on.
Oh, hello.
Oh,
hello.
There you go.
Hi, Michelle. How many,
we got 6 people.
6 people?
We have 6 people here, and no intention of speaking, but that may change. We'll see.
Okay, thank you. Erica in Brattleboro?
Erica, if you are there and we just can't hear you, perhaps you could just chat in that you're there and how many people may be with you.
Rob in Lamoille?
Hello, this is Rob at LCPC, and I have one public participant, and comments are to be determined.
Okay, thank you.
Erica is there with 4 people.
Okay, and
Thank you, Erica. I saw the chat.
And we heard from Erica that there's 4 people in Brattleboro. Josh, if you could, Josh in Middlebury, if you could type in your number of attendees. We're unable to hear you at the moment. How many people want to speak with that? Okay, here in Montpelier we have 8 people. No one is interested in speaking at the moment.
Welcome everybody in the room at least.
Mike in Rutland.
Mike's actually letting someone in right now. This is Kit in Rutland, and once he gets up here with the other person, we'll have 6 people.
Thank you. And we heard from Josh in Middlebury that he has 8 people. Bethany in St. Albans.
This is Bethany. We have no members of the public in attendance and no public comment.
Okay, thank you. Doug in St. Johnsbury.
Hi, this is Doug in St. Johnsbury. We have 3 members of the public, and they're not sure if they want to speak, but they might.
Very good. And Victoria in Woodstock?
Hi, we have 1 person here and no interest in speaking at the moment.
Thank you. And Brian in Winooski?
Hi, we have 9 members of the public and a couple that would like to speak.
Great. And Amy Bell is monitoring the web stream. Amy, how many folks are on the web stream?
I cannot tell. Oh, we have 36 people attending. That includes the RPC. So 26 additional.
Okay. That's minus some. But
minus a couple in here. Yep.
Okay. Great. So it looks like we have pretty good attendance. I will now introduce tonight's presenters. Kevin Marshy, who is the VTrans Chief Engineer. He'll be introducing the project, and Phil Goff from the consultant team and the project manager from Also Planning and Design will be presenting the presentation, giving you most of the content for this evening. For the open content portion of the meeting, there will be a technical panelist, which will include Eric Wygonik from RFG, Sam Piper from Malta Planning, John Kaplan from VTrans, the Bicycle Pedestrian Program Manager, Amy Bell from Policy and Planning, and Jesse Devlin from Highway Safety and Design. So the purpose of today's meeting is to really review the scope of Phase 2, to go over what the gap analysis of the high-use priority corridors will, at a high level, entail, and also give you information about our bicycle safety hotspot analysis that has already come to completion that we're interested in hearing comments on. And we also hope that you will walk away knowing that there will be opportunities to participate through an online survey and an additional Phase 2 wiki map that we will get into further details throughout this presentation. Also, that we have a project email that you're able to provide comments until December 16th based on what you hear tonight. And also, you could send an email letting us know if you would like to be included on the contact list to directly find out when the online survey and the wiki map will be available. I'm now going to hand it over to Kevin Marshy to go over Phase 1 and Phase 2, just a brief summary for everybody. Kevin, are you on the phone with us?
I am. Can you hear me, Summer?
I can. Thank you.
Okay.
And,
good evening, I'm sorry. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for participating. This being our first statewide event, I think that we've tried it in this format since the last couple we've had at Vermont Interactive Television. So hopefully everything works well, and I appreciate folks taking the time tonight to join us and be part of this important project. What I'm going to do briefly is just introduce the project. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard this before. I'm hoping we may have some new folks tonight, but I know that we've had some participation from folks in the past. Really, the purpose of this on-road bicycle facility plan is to give VTrans an opportunity to work, obviously, with folks in the bicycling community to better understand and align our resources to implement improvements out there on the state network. As the Phase 1 of the project, who many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, but I'll give a little bit of background on that. The idea of this project came about when we started looking at the limited resources we had at VTrans, but also the desire to make improvements out on the network such that we could be sure that where we were making those improvements with those limited resources were those areas that were most important. So Phase 1 really took, there was an intense data collection. I'm not going to go into all of that tonight. Intense data collection and analysis that allowed us to tier the highway network into Vermont into 3 different tiers, high, moderate, and low use / priority. You see on the slide here, you'll see the blue roads are the Tier 1 roads, the moderate use are the green, and the lower use are the yellow roads. And so The idea here is that what we started to do is be able to look at these higher tiers, and really that's part of the focus of phase 2 tonight is taking a look at those higher tiers. But I won't get ahead of myself. The idea here was that we were not only looking at recreational riders, we were looking at folks that were using the state highway network, and I should emphasize that this is about the state highway network, that we were focusing on those roads for both recreation and commuter use and cyclist touring and everything else. So we took data from all of those various groups along with the land use to come up with the tiered map that you see to the right of this slide that's up right now. Phase 2 of this plan, which we're here to talk about tonight, there's 3 different subsets of that. One is to take and conduct a safety analysis of the entire network to look at those areas where there may be crash data or other information that we might have. I believe we looked at 10 years of crash data, probably going to get into that a little bit further later, looking at over 400 crashes. Those crashes are just the crashes that we have in our database that are associated with automobile and bicycle collisions. Unfortunately, we don't have a mechanism to collect the crash data associated with just bicycle crashes. So the crashes that we were looking at in this analysis were those that only involved an automobile with a bicycle. So the first phase is to look at do that safety analysis around the state and identify those areas. The second phase was really to look at and develop criteria so that we can identify those areas where there's gaps. And so what are those roadway evaluation criteria? Things like, the average daily traffic, truck traffic, lane width, shoulder width, those types of things are some of the criteria that we've looked at to help identify the gaps on the network. And then the third phase is really looking at and evaluating the high use corridors that I mentioned earlier to start to identify opportunities to make improvements out on the network on those higher tier roadways. The next steps, which would be phase 3, is to take the information from phase 2, the safety analysis, the evaluation that we've done to look at the opportunities on the higher tier network, and to really start to bring that to life, looking for opportunities on how we can implement some of those improvements along those higher use corridors. That may include starting to incorporate those types of improvements into projects, current projects, let's say paving projects or bridge projects, something to that. But it may also end up in looking at some more systemic type of projects that are focused only on the improvements for the bicycle network. I should say here, one of the things that we've tried really hard at VTrans in recent years and working with folks in the bicycle community is really to look at the bicycle mode as something that's integrated into everything that we consider at VTrans. So when we talk about bicycle improvements, we really like to think of it as we're making those investments for all the modes, and that bicycles are up there, unlike maybe what we might have seen 20 years ago, where bicycles are considered in those modes and in those considerations for projects that we have. This just brings it to a higher level, and especially on those tier 1 roads, again, going back and looking at and understanding the fact that there are limited resources, and we want to make sure we get the best bang for the buck in the resources that we are deploying, especially for the bicycle mode. The next piece, and I started to mention this a little bit as well, is really why are we doing this? We have some current initiatives that have been ongoing for a number of years. This is really allowing us to align those resources and focus in those areas. Some of the things that we've had ongoing in recent years that have made improvements to the network, although in some cases some of these have been relatively quiet improvements. Not everybody, they haven't necessarily been promoted, but we have surely been working with some of the bicycle groups around the state, certainly Local Motion and others. A couple of things that are worth mentioning here, design consideration, and there's much more than that's on this slide. But in general, one of our practices for the last several years has been any new projects that are out there, any paving projects, roadway reconstruction, bridge projects, for the most part, you're finding that we are striping those at 11-foot lanes. Our previous practice was 12-foot lanes, so we're gaining a foot on each side of the roadway in terms of shoulder width. And the high traffic volume areas, the Shelburne roads and the places like that, where there's a higher percentage of truck traffic or large turning movements, you may find that there's still some projects that have 12-foot lanes, but in general, our goal has been to aim and stripe the network at 11-foot lanes. Adding shoulder width, one of the things we've been doing for the last few years with many of our paving projects, and just to differentiate a little bit, with some of our thinner treatments, an inch of pavement or an inch and a half or maybe 2 inches of pavement, in those cases we're not always able to get the additional shoulder width because we need some structure underneath the shoulder. But when we're talking about some of our reclamation projects where we're going down and getting into the gravel, we're going down 8 inches or 10 inches, we've really been striving to get a minimum of 3-foot shoulders, but where we can get to 4-foot or 5-foot shoulders, following the guidance in the Vermont state standards, and obviously with any reconstruction projects, which we don't do many of them. Right now we have one on Route 7 in Charlotte as an example. Those certainly would have the wider shoulders associated with them. The next category here is maintenance activities. And I should mention, when we talk about phase 1 of the study that was completed, I guess I'd have to think back now, last fall or over the winter. One of the things that you see here, the first bullet under maintenance, is shoulder sweeping. And one of the things that we did this year is we took phase 1, and again, part of this whole initiative isn't just where we can increase the infrastructure, increase width, and those types of things, but it's also for maintenance activities. And this past spring, we distributed the map that you saw earlier to our maintenance districts, and they prioritized the spring sweeping of the shoulders such that they were hitting the higher tier roads first, and then they moved their way down through the second and third tier, really with the understanding that we can't be everywhere all at once. Again, a primary part of this project is making sure we're getting the most bang for our buck when it comes to those higher use corridors. Pothole patching, that's something we chase year-round as well, but certainly not just looking at between the yellow and the white line, but looking at the shoulders as well. And then with our minor pavement maintenance, for several years now, we've really tried to put a focus on when we are leveling with limited resources. A lot of the minor pavement maintenance is with state-only dollars, is not just doing, again, between the yellow line and the white line, but making sure we're out there trying to get the shoulders as well. It's not to say there may be some instances where we're not able to. If it's a wider 4 or 5 foot shoulder that's in good shape, we may not get all the way out there with fresh pavement, but in general, our goal is to go from edge of shoulder to edge of shoulder, edge of pavement to edge of pavement with our minor pavement maintenance. And then obviously some of the things we've been doing, you can see some of the slides here, is incorporating some of the techniques for bicycle facilities into some of our projects, most notably this past summer on US 302, the Barry-Montpelier Road. We implemented a road diet. Something that we're committed to. We're committed to road diets around the state where they're warranted and where where we have the width and the opportunity to put them in. Obviously, we work with the municipalities that we're in, not just to push through a certain implementation. We want to make sure that we've reached out to the community, done like we're doing tonight, had appropriate public input on these types of things. So far, we have gotten feedback in some of those areas where we put in road diets, and we've worked with folks. We've done some analysis. We've done some studies to make sure that we understand the safety impacts, the timing impacts, the traffic movements, and so forth. And that's one of those areas that we're committed to. Right now, out on the Barry-Montpelier Road, we did have some community concern. We elected to move forward based on the analysis. Since it's been implemented earlier this fall, we really have had a lot of positive comments back on that road diet. And then, bicycle pavement markings, and this might just be pavement markings in general. One of our areas of emphasis in the last couple of years is trying to make sure that we're hitting as much of the network as we possibly can. Our goal being 100% of the state highway network with fresh lines every year. Again, looking to prioritize those to some of the more higher use corridors for both automobiles and bicycles. not necessarily being able to get to every one of those higher use areas that's on the on-road bicycle map, because there are some short segments, so there's some logistics to it, but certainly making a commitment to try to make sure we refresh those every year. And in those areas where we have bike stencils and bike lanes and those types of things, really putting in a renewed effort into making sure we hit those as early in the season as practical. So those are just some of the things that we have ongoing. The goal, obviously, of this project is to build on that and continue some of those things into the future, especially looking at a way to prioritize and align our resources in these different tiers that we're talking about this evening.
Great. Thanks so much, Kevin, for kind of setting the foundation to where we're starting here on the Phase 2 effort. For those not in the room here in Montpelier, you've heard my voice before, but I'll introduce myself again. My name is Phil Goff. I'm with Alta Planning and Design. I'm the project manager for this effort, and we are the consultants working with VTrans. We also have a sub-consultant, RSG, helping us out as well. So I'll be doing really the sort of bulk of the rest of the presentation to take you through the analysis and the findings that we've done so far. And we'll move into a question and answer and discussion period later, and we have some experts here in the room and on the phone that will sort of help facilitate that as well. So just to summarize, the sort of overall scope of work in which Alta has been hired, in essence, to do here. We have a 5-task effort here. The first task is an outreach and public participation, which involves a couple of public meetings. This obviously is the first one tonight. We have online participation tools, which I'll talk about a little later. We have a trio of stakeholder meetings, and then we have frequent internal meetings with VTrans staff. The second task is an identification and analysis of safety hotspots by assessing crashes and difficult bicycling location data that we learned from Phase 1. We also are assessing 10 locations identified as the top 10 safety hotspots to determine some of the trends and the potential countermeasures. Again, we'll get into all these in more detail later. Task 3 is develop an evaluation criteria system to analyze how comfortable roadways are within the state of Vermont. Comfortable to bicycle upon, that is, of course. Task 4 then is to use that methodology and evaluation criteria to score the high use and priority corridors that we've already established through VTrans effort in Phase 1 of this project. And then finally, we'll develop a report that summarizes, of course, all of our findings and such. The schedule includes a pair of public meetings, as I mentioned before, and webinar events. Thanks again for attending tonight. We're reviewing, or Kevin's already reviewed, the Phase 1 results. The scope and the goals for Phase 2 have already talked about a little bit, and I'll discuss soon the preliminary findings. The second meeting, which we intend to have sometime in May, to be determined, but we'll let you know. The second public meeting and webinar will include some summary of the event here tonight, a review of the roadway evaluation criteria, the sort of final criteria that's used, and then the draft gap analysis map based on the roadway scoring that the evaluation criteria will be incorporated for. Of course, Q&A for both of them. No surprise there. There we go. So the future online public participation, which will be happening quite soon. So for task 3, in the coming weeks, we'll develop an online survey that will be used, that will enable you, the public, to review and to rank potential evaluation criteria for assessing the roadways, the comfort level for bicycling of each roadway. This feedback of the high priority roadways will determine the final set of criteria that we use to assess the priority roadways. That will then move into task 4, and once the preliminary results have been prepared, these will be uploaded to an online interactive wiki map, and you, the public, will be asked to provide feedback on the scoring designations that we use of all the high-use priority corridors throughout the state established back in Phase 1. The results will then be updated based on your feedback to create the final scoring for the network of state roadways throughout the state. As I talked about earlier, the initial core task for the team so far was to identify and to analyze safety hotspots throughout the state. The crash analysis included a multi-step process I'll describe really in the next bunch of slides, starting with the mapping of reported bicycle crashes. For the bicycle crash data, we used VTrans bicycle crash data to begin our analysis. The data was narrowed to include a 10-year total, and this is on state roads only, so that's sort of an important distinction for all of us to recall here. So in that period, there was 419 crashes that were reported, which of course excludes some that in all likelihood were not reported, those that did not involve an injury or major property damage. Those are typically not reported on by police. So as you can see in the map on the screen, many of the crashes, of course, as you'd expect, are concentrated in Metro Burlington and other urban areas of the state. That said, of course, the crashes have occurred on roads really throughout the state in both rural and urban areas and suburban areas in different roadway contexts. After mapping the crash locations, at first step, we then sought to understand the results of the crashes and the trends or the characteristics related to those crashes. Of the 419 crashes that I described before, included in that we included in our analysis, and that is a 10-year total from 2006 to 2015. It resulted in 2 fatalities, and again, I want to emphasize these are state roadways only in which we did this analysis. We know that there are other fatalities. If anyone on the line can mute themselves, somehow someone unmute themselves, we're getting feedback. Josh D. Let's see if I can. Okay. All right, we're good. Okay. All right, so we're good now. Okay, so again, I just want to make sure everyone understood that the analysis, the crash analysis that we did involves state roadways only. So that 490 crashes included a couple fatalities, a number of incapacitating serious injuries, and you can see quite a large portion obviously included some minor injury or damage to bicycle, to vehicle, or other property, and almost 20% resulted in no injury at all. So based on the information that we've collected by the state police reports and the VTrans data, the crash trends included 9 key trends. So of those trends, we looked at the severity, and a number, as you saw before, many collisions resulted in minor injuries. We also looked at the annual number reported by crashes. And the interesting thing there is there have been a trending down. Again, this is just on the state roadways. There's a bit of a trending down, which is good news, with the average being 42. We also looked at roads with most crashes. They're disproportionately represented based on their total lane miles. We looked at the time of day, and the majority of collisions are occurring during the day, simply because that's when most people are, in fact, riding, of course. We looked at days of the week. And somewhat surprising, perhaps, to some is that crashes have happened more frequently during weekdays rather than weekends. I bet a lot of people out there may do a large chunk of their riding on weekends, but in fact, when you look at crashes and know that many of those crashes are occurring in the more urbanized areas of the state, those are the sort of utility transportation trips in which those crashes are being involved. So you do see much more on weekdays. Age of cyclists, as you'd expect, sort of the 17 to 54-year-olds. Gender of cyclists, that's another sort of factor we looked at. 4 out of 5 involve a male bicyclist. The ratio roughly in many states, including likely Vermont, although we don't have the data, tends to be about 3 to 1 in terms of male versus female riders. So that's relatively consistent, but obviously there's a bit higher level of crashes that involve men rather than women. Another key trend is the location, and that most collisions are occurring at intersections, nearly 60%. And then the final thing we looked at was traffic controls and whether they're present, and most collisions are occurring at intersection, but at uncontrolled intersections, just a slight majority there. And so after understanding the trends or the characteristics for the crashes, we then sought to better understand the roadway design factors that may have contributed to the crash. So our analysis compared the prevalence of 8 roadway design factors that may be associated with prevalence of crashes on Vermont state roadways. So this includes factors like the density of development and land use is what that refers to, the number of lanes, lane width, the shoulder width, typical speed, the annual average daily traffic, AADT, turn lanes and whether they are present, and the presence of a median in this type. With the roadway design factors, where there appeared to be an overrepresentation in the number of crashes within those factors, that's when a red flag comes up, that a particular factor may have an influence on the crash frequency. For example, for density, again, that's sort of land use density. Most roads in the state are in rural areas, but most of the crashes are occurring in the more urbanized areas of the state. And of course, that sort of urban, suburban, town, village, that's all sort of mixed in within the term urban. When discovering which factors were the most overrepresented in the number of crashes, the factors most prevalent that we discovered included the density of development and land use and the average daily traffic. Also, the lack of shoulder presence was another critical one. So others had some significant issues, of course, but did not stand out as much as the other 3. One of the factors to point out, sort of interesting and perhaps paradoxically, is the slower roads. You can see in the typical speed, slower roads did feature more crashes than the higher speed roads, which most of us probably associate with sort of higher levels of difficulty of bicycling. But again, with the given number of crashes happening in the more urbanized areas of Vermont, that would explain why that's the case. So after determining the key factors for the 419 crashes in our analysis, our next task was to create a scoring methodology to isolate the top 10 safety hotspots in the state. In order to do that, we used 4 sources of data, or inputs, 4 inputs, within 3 categories. And those categories included safety data, included the rate of bicycling, and the length of the roadways. And within the safety issue data, so there were sort of 2 key sources within the safety issue data. One were, of course, the data we obtained through the 419 crashes, but the other one was understanding what was considered the difficult bicycling locations that we learned from all of you who at least responded to the Wikimap earlier in phase 1. We wanted to ensure that we incorporated what the community told us in the online Wikimap during phase 1. As such, we did include, as I said before, analyze those difficult bicycling locations to inform where the 10 most significant safety hotspots were in Vermont. And just a note, so we did have 358 recorded locations that we analyzed. There was also 845 votes. That was really more the key factor. A vote is really when someone looked at another location that someone had already stated as a difficult bicycling location and noted their approval of that. So that's what really the votes are referencing there. So using that 3-category methodology with the 4 different data inputs, it turns out that initially all of the 10 most significant hotspots were in Chittenden County. However, the team, the VTrans and the consultant team wanted to see what the effects of our model and that analysis methodology had throughout the state. So we reran the model again, and we excluded Chittenden County to arrive at, in essence, a top 5 safety hotspot within Chittenden County and a top 5 hotspots outside of Chittenden County. These combined 10 hotspots represented roughly 1/10 of 1% of the approximately 2,400 miles of state roadways throughout the state of Vermont. But that 0.1 or that 1/10 of 1% accounted for 16% of all bike crashes statewide and 18% of all of the difficult bicycling locations that we understood from the wiki map throughout the state as well. So in the identification of the 10 hotspots, as I mentioned, we kind of broke it up into two: 5 safety hotspots, Chittenden County, 5 safety hotspots outside of Chittenden County. We did more detailed analysis that is part of ultimately our report, but those 5 hotspots within Chittenden County include South Winooski Avenue in Burlington, Williston Road in South Burlington, Pearl Street in Essex, Riverside Ave in Burlington, and Colchester Ave in Burlington as well. The 5 spots outside of Chittenden County, again, as I said, we reran the model, excluded the Chittenden County crash locations to get the 5 hotspots throughout the state. Those included Main Street or Route 5 in Brattleboro, State Street, Business Route 4 in Rutland, North Street, sort of a combination of North Street and Main Street. Fresno, Bennington was up there as well. Oh, and I apologize for the numbering there on the left. I'm just noticing isn't quite in the same order. And Elm Street in Ennisburg and Route 30 in Castleton. So after narrowing in on the top 10 safety hotspots, we then did what the team called a deep dive of the crash data, and that is reading the police report narratives to better understand some of the key factors that contributed to the crash. So for the top 10 hotspots, we reviewed narratives. There were 72 crashes within the top 10 hotspots, and we reviewed 67 reports that were available to us. So when looking at those 67 narratives, there are 4 main themes that stood out to us. First was that motor vehicle driver inattention during turning was the first that really stood out to us, and this is exacerbated on more complex roadways that have more than 2 travel lanes and contain many curb cuts. Secondly, were parking-related issues, and of course those that bicycle know that opening car doors is something we're always looking out for. So the opening car doors and drivers actually crossing the shoulder area to get to parking happening right in front of cyclists. So those are 2 of the themes that were identified that are parking related. The third is related to bicyclists riding on sidewalks. Sidewalks are a location where both drivers are not necessarily anticipating cyclists and where bicyclists don't always anticipate the threat that a motor vehicle could provide at a driveway or a cross-street location. So I think, perhaps for some this may come as a bit of a surprise to some who often will choose to, on occasion, ride on a sidewalk when not comfortable on a roadway, but this is what the data is telling us, that there certainly is a prevalence of crashes there. And then, and finally, there was a significant number of crashes in the top 10 hotspots where bicycle equipment or rider-related mistakes were attributed, which include a failure to obey traffic laws, various traffic laws, and faulty equipment, folks who had inoperable brakes or those that didn't have working lights at night. So to summarize all that we learned from this top 10 hotspot methodology and the deeper dives, the primary takeaways show that the greatest number of crashes have occurred in the downtown areas and village centers in the presence of on-street parking. In fact, 9 out of the 10 hotspots are on the Class 1 town highways, which of course are in these downtown and village areas. The Class 1 town highways, for those that don't know, those are short segments of state highway that pass through downtown and village centers that are maintained by local municipalities. So that's not to say that there aren't safety issues on rural roadways. However, for the significant number of crashes on other roads, including rural roads, it's quite clear that state roads with the high traffic volumes and narrow or no shoulders are some of the significant safety factors we've discovered in our analysis. So some may be asking, certainly a good question, so what do we do with all this analysis? So we are incorporating, of course, this crash analysis into our work moving forward, and that will include incorporating the findings of this analysis to inform the evaluation criteria that we're going to get into soon in our next task to evaluate the opportunities. This is outside of necessarily the scope of our work, but this is to evaluate opportunities to incorporate the safety data into existing grant programs like our Federal Transportation Alternative Programs, and there are others. So this data will be sort of a key opportunity for VTrans to sort of leverage that data and incorporate it into those grants. This analysis will be used later on in the future, the phase 3 that Kevin had spoken about earlier. Certainly this analysis will be a critical component. And also, you know, in terms of in real time in some ways, or in the near future, informing the design of VTrans projects as applicable, whether it's bridge projects, paving projects, roadway projects. The hope is with this analysis, there could be some incorporation and perhaps alterations. So to finish up, I would just want to quickly review the next steps in the scope of work, which is really the task 3 and 4, which we'll be jumping into really soon after this meeting, of course. So the next immediate step is to create the evaluation criteria inputs that include the use scores from the phase 1 effort, along with the roadway variables that we have discovered in our safety analysis. We will also incorporate the feedback from an online survey that will be released really in the coming weeks, where we ask you to take a look at our draft evaluation criteria and let us know if what's important to you in terms of criteria that should be used to evaluate roadways. So this criteria will take into consideration the types of cyclists using the state roadways. So for instance, the bulk of trips within the city, town, and village centers, typically on those class 1 town highways, are typically the transportation trips, where those on the rural roadways, you know, tend to be more used by recreational bicyclists, frequently with cyclists with some level of experience and confidence riding their motor vehicles. Of course, not exclusively, but that's the general trend. So to give you a sense of examples of the kind of evaluation criteria that we're sort of pulling out of this safety analysis and are likely to provide in a draft of our evaluation criteria for you to review in the survey, is the potential presence or the absence of designated bike facilities. I think we have another person. No, okay, don't worry about it. The presence or absence of a shoulder, the presence or absence of a median, presence of a traffic control, any kind of traffic control. It could be signal, stop signs, or roadway markings. The pavement condition, the number of travel lanes within a particular roadway, the average daily traffic or average annual daily traffic, the speed of traffic, and the percentage of heavy trucks. So that's sort of a sampling of what our draft evaluation criteria may be that we'll want you to give us feedback on. So after that is complete and we finalize the evaluation criteria for task 4, we will then use them to score the state highways, the high use corridors, the priority corridors, to have a better understanding of their adequacy for bicycling. 2, we will then post the scores on a wiki map, an online wiki map, in the spring and seek community input on whether the scores that we designate feels right for those who ride or drive on these roadways more regularly. 3, after receiving this feedback, we will revise the results as needed. And then 4, we will create the gap analysis map that will indicate the segments of state roadways in need of improvements that will be studied in more detail further on in phase 3 of the planning effort. Again, just to reiterate, to have you sort of look at a visual of the public participation, we will have the online survey with the draft evaluation criteria again, starting in the next few weeks and into January. We will then revise that based on comments we receive, and then we will have a online wiki map available for people to look at the scoring that we gave to the state roadways. And of course, throughout this process that will end in the summer, we have our project website that in all the emails and other materials you've received, you'll have, and we'll post that in just a sec, to provide draft materials and solicit additional input. So we're happy to take questions now. We have some key panelists here in the room and a couple on the phone, including Amy Bell, who's VTrans Policy Planning and Intermodal Development Division Planning Coordinator, Jesse Devlin, who is VTrans Project Delivery Bureau Highway Safety and Design Manager, John Kaplan is here, VTrans Municipal Assistant Bureau Bicycle and Pedestrian Program Manager, Erica Wygonik from the subconsultant firm RSG is our senior engineer on the project, and Sam Piper, senior planner working with me at Alta Planning and Design, is on the phone. He's sort of the technical lead in much of the analysis as well. Okay. So just to let you know, we are still accepting comments on the material presented here tonight until December 16th. Please let us know at vermontbike@gmail.com. You have that email address is the best way to get in touch with Summer, who is the project manager, and the website there is vtrans.vermont.gov/planning/bike plan. So thank you very much for attending the webinar or being here with us in Montpelier, and we're going to do a go-around. I'm going to hand it back over to Summer to do a go-around to the RPC to get questions.
Great. Thank you, Phil. Just to outline the process a little bit to everyone, we checked in with each site and they gave us the number of attendees, and it sounds like many sites didn't have folks interested in speaking, but I'm going to go back through and just make sure that no one changed their mind. So the process here will look like we'll go to each site in alphabetical order and receive comments from 2 attendees at a time. Each attendee will have up to 2 minutes to speak. For the web stream participants, we will read 2 comments submitted via the chat feature. And this will continue until 7:55. I'm going to start by...
What about the people who are not at those sites? There are a lot of us.
Oh, yep. So if you could please type in your question, and we will take the questions in the chat bar, and somebody here in Montpelier will read 2 questions from the chat window.
Where do we type them in? I don't see anywhere.
There should be a chat window where you're able to type that in the go to the meeting dialog box.
And if you could please mute your phone when...
Okay, I'll do it now.
Thank you. Okay, Catherine, if you could let us know if your participant decided to speak.
Neither our participant or myself need to speak right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to Michelle and Bennington. There are 6 of you. Anyone interested in speaking?
Yeah.
Great.
Hi, my name is Jean Connor. I have 2 questions. On some of the low-use roads, are they low-use roads because they're inferior in some way? And I'm thinking if those roads were improved, if that indeed is the case, it would get cyclists off of the more congested areas, which could reduce the number of crashes. My other question or comment is I've been noticing probably in the last, 10 years, I myself am not a cyclist, but I've noticed helmet use is really on the decline, and I didn't know if VTrans was, addressing that.
I think John should probably take the helmet.
Sure.
Okay. John Kaplan here will take the helmet use, and
Phase 1 question, Erica?
Erica, can you take the Phase 1 question?
This is Erica Wygonik with RSG. We led the Phase 1 component with Alta as the sub to us, so we're just changing roles here for Phase 2. When we looked at prioritizing the roads through current and potential use in Phase 1, a big effort there was not just where people we're currently riding, but trying to identify where there would be use if the roadway is, were improved or felt adequate for cyclists. So we made every effort possible to understand where people were currently riding, but then also, especially if there were roads that it seemed like had a lot of potential for people to use, but didn't, potentially because there was a deficiency with the roadway or something that made cyclists feel unsafe, and so they chose not to use the road. We wanted to make sure that was recognized. So that was a distinct part of phase 1.
Okay, so this is John Kaplan. So as far as helmet use, and that's not obviously not really the focus of this plan, but you know, we don't have a statewide helmet law in Vermont, although it has been proposed several times, I would say, over the last 10, 15 years. The legislature has never supported it. We do encourage helmet use through all of our education materials and you know, education programs that we partner with organizations like Local Motion to do. So that's really the best I can say about that. Is it's not through lack of trying to educate people about using helmets.
Michelle, did you have another person interested in speaking?
Yep, we got
Hi.
another one.
This is Tom Jacobs from Bennington as well. We talked about limited resources. Could you give us just a sort of an overview of what is the budget for the cycling side of VTrans? What percentage?
Budget or the
budget for cycling?
Did you say the budget for cycling?
Cycling projects and programs?
Oh,
yes.
Oh, bicycling projects. I think, well,
I don't have it off the top of my head. So this is John Kaplan again. I don't want to throw a number out there without being confident of it, and it's a little bit of a hard question to answer. We have tried to do some accounting of all the improvements that we make for actually both biking and walking, and that's why I'm hesitating a little bit, because we have a report that combines those two modes in terms of what VTrans spends overall, not just through our grant programs, but through things like shoulder widening, sidewalks on bridges, you know, all of those things. So I'm not going to throw a number out there without it being accurate, and it's a little bit hard to pull out just bicycling expenditures.
I guess the real question is, what portion of the VTrans budget is identified for cycling activities, not so much the grants, or is that part of the budget process?
It's still hard to say, because if you look at our capital program, the bicycle and pedestrian program is pulled out separately, but that is not, doesn't reflect all of our expenditures on biking and walking. That's just the way it's set up in the budget. It's a complex topic.
Thanks, John.
Project cost. Right. Paving,
Yeah.
bridges.
Yeah, and Tom, this is Jesse Devlin, Program Manager for Highway Safety and Design. And I think what you're getting at is hopefully one of the outcomes of this is to have a way to truly prioritize and implement specific changes. So to me, that is one of the outcomes that I see coming from this, is to have a way to truly prioritize and implement.
thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Bennington. Moving on to Brattleboro. Erica, it sounds like you have 4 questions. We'll take 2 of them now, and if there's an opportunity, we'll come back for the second 2. Can you hear us? Yes. Yes. Who wants to go first with their question? Go ahead. I'm going to start off. Okay, I'll just listen.
So you said that Main Street in Brattleboro was a place where there was a high frequency of crashes. I've observed that Route 30 leading out of Brattleboro seems to have had a pretty high proportion of bicycle crashes. So I was wondering how that data was analyzed.
And will you state your name, please?
Oh, sure. My name is Barbara Walsh. I'm here in Brattleboro. I own Brattleboro Bicycle Shop.
Thank you.
Yep. Well, this is Phil from Alta. I can just say that, indeed that was a location where some crash data did come up in Brattleboro, but again, just based on our methodology and the number of crashes that did occur that were reported, and those that also included places within Brattleboro where people designated as the difficult bicycling locations in phase one. It were those kind of two key inputs which led us to the Main Street Route 5 as the sort of prime hotspot, at least in that part of the state. So it's not to say that that there aren't issues on other roadways in Brattleboro. Okay, is there another question?
Kind of have three. My name's Dave Cohen. Yeah, as Barbara was saying, it's like, there are other, spots like at Route 30, and there's certainly Route 9. Actually, probably are fewer bike accidents than you would expect because people are just not riding because they're so scared to ride. And I'm wondering how that fits into the plan because these are corridors where many more people would be riding if we had greater bike infrastructure. So accidents and hotspots are not showing up because people are literally just petrified as far as riding bikes. The other thing is that I didn't see anything in the data around seasonal. So is there a certain season where these crashes happening, or we're expecting more people riding, of course, during the summer? Any happening during the winter? I ride during the winter and throughout the winter. I'm just wondering about that. Just a little aside thing is about electric bikes and the coming of all kinds of electric assisted vehicles like the ELF, which is kind of a solar electric human-powered kind of bike car. And there are implications for those kinds of things in the future. It's not exactly what you guys are doing right now, but I'm wondering if anybody has any comments about that as well. The evolution of the bicycle, which can carry passengers, carry cargo, and have electric assist and just way more capability.
Well, I can take the first part of the question if no one else wants to jump in. Indeed, areas, state roadways in which there have been no or few reported crashes, those aren't registering in this first part of our analysis. And indeed, you're right, a big part of that is not because they're so safe and comfortable for people, but it's because few cyclists tend to use them. So it's those roadways, when we develop the evaluation criteria, and then we're evaluating the roadways in order to determine what potential appropriate measures down the line in phase 3 will be. A roadway like that you referred to in Brattleboro is going to appear, I can't guarantee it, but is likely to appear in our analysis with a score that would imply that it's a real gap in the bicycling network in that part of southeast Vermont. So I think, so it's not to say that we're ignoring those roadways, they're just not registering now in this sort of first part of the analysis, but when we develop the gap analysis map, then something like that is likely to show up.
And Phil, this is Sam. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Okay, and just to amend Phil's comment, what I did want to mention is that when we did the methodology to identify the hotspots, one of the critical input factors was actually input that we gathered during phase 1 of the project through the online input map. So we actually asked people to place points that represented instances that people thought were difficult to bicycle, and then we summarized the votes for all of those different locations, and we fed that input into our hotspot model. And why that was really important, it goes right to your point, is that there are instances on the analysis roadways where people aren't riding currently because there's a perceived safety or a perceived comfort issue. And so we actually have some hotspots where there are very few crashes, but there were many, many difficult bicycling location votes. And because of those difficult bicycling location votes, they actually made it into the top 10. So that's why we thought it was so important to include that public input, because you bring up a great point. There are instances where people aren't riding, and that's the reason why there are no crashes or very few crashes, but that doesn't mean that people don't want to ride there.
Thanks, Sam.
And also just to also add that during phase one, when we determined bicycle use, our Wikimap asked people to let us know where they would like to ride if it was improved, and that's part of our use calculation. So these type of things were a factor. And again, this is a statewide plan, so it has to be distributed evenly throughout the state. Thank you for your question.
If I could just do a quick response, someone had asked, what is a road diet? It's kind of a wonky technical term perhaps for some of us. A road diet is when you transform typically a 4-lane roadway, put it on a diet, which can mean either narrowing the lanes to create a shoulder or a bike lane, or to actually reconfigure the travel lane to make a 4-lane road into a 3-lane road with the median turn pockets for left turns and with bike lanes on the side. So that's what road diet refers to that someone had mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you. Just to remind folks, I just wanted to let everyone remind folks that the primary purpose of this meeting is to receive your comments regarding the project, and in order to maximize and be respectful of everyone's time. If you do have questions related to the topics beyond the current project, we encourage you to submit those questions in writing so that we can adequately respond following this meeting. In the interest of time, I just wanted to state that. So we took 2 questions from Brattleboro, correct? Okay, we're moving on to Rob in Lamoille. And thank you for asking the road diet question, because there probably was other people out there confused.
Hello, this is Lamoille. We have one question.
Okay.
This is Justin Barton Kaplan. And first, I just want to say thank you so much. This is a phenomenal job in putting this plan together and doing these assessments. One question I had is, I live in the Northeast Kingdom, and so I think it's fair to say I'm a little disappointed with the amount of priority 1 or high priority roads in the Northeast Kingdom. And I was kind of curious to understand, so once you get through phase 3, how long is the implementation plan for? Is it like going to be a 5-year plan? Is this a 10-year plan? Are there plans to reassess at some point in the future? So essentially, how long is the kingdom, left with a short or a small number of high priority roads?
Summer, this is Kevin. Would you like me to take that one?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin.
I guess I would answer that 2 different ways. One, first, just because a road isn't a tier 1 road doesn't necessarily mean that VTrans will not be out there making improvements to that road. And maybe that's something I should have covered earlier in my presentation. And certainly when you look at some of our lower volume rural roads, and I know in past conversations I've had with some folks in the bike community, there are those lower volume roads, less than 1,500 cars a day or less than 1,000 cars a day, where if whatever the existing surface is paved, it's a vast improvement than what's there. So just because it's not a tier 1, tier 2, or it's just not a tier 1 road, doesn't mean that we won't be out there making improvements. The second point I'd like to make is that this is viewed as, this is a living document. So this isn't, coming up with this plan and even going through phase 3 isn't intended to say, okay, we're going to do, 438 things in a 5-year period or a 10-year period. The idea is that that we will be incorporating these types of improvements, especially on the tier 1 roads, over the course of time. So it's a living document. There'll be changes. There'll be roads that may become tier 1 roads. There may be some that, some that move up, some that move down over time. But it's something that we're going to continue to monitor. Obviously, in Vermont, we're not seeing vast swings in the type of usage or the traffic volumes on any one given road over a 1 or 2 year period. I know sometimes that's the case in terms of there are some developments going in. But so anyway, to summarize, certainly this is a living document. Certainly, we're not going to be ignoring the tier 2 and tier 3 roads. And over time, we will work to make sure that we're making as many improvements as we possibly can. I go back to the fact that the idea here is to make sure that we're incorporating you know, the bicycle mode, the pedestrian mode, in everything that we're doing at VTrans.
Thank you, Kevin. And I'll also add that one of our stakeholders on our stakeholder group is from the Northeast Kingdom, and he really likes to emphasize that this is a state system plan, and it's not looking at local roads. And there's fewer state roads in the Northeast Kingdom than there are in other areas of the state. Okay, moving on to Middlebury. Josh.
Oh, yeah, I think he was one that never quite got connected.
There were people there that wanted to talk. They earlier seconded the first part of the question about.
It sounds like we'll come back to Middlebury, or do you know the question?
Okay, I think we've covered the question that they were.
Okay. And here in Montpelier, is there anyone that would like to speak or has a question?
I have a question. Hi, this is Emily Brodek from Local Motion in Montpelier this evening, which is lovely. One of the things we mentioned for the third phase was about level of service and bicyclist comfort. And for those who are somewhat familiar with the transportation sector, know about level of service from a vehicular perspective. So Phil, I wonder if you can just talk a little bit more about what that is hoping to identify and what that means when we're talking about the bicyclist as a focus.
Can I pass that question off to my colleague Sam, who I assume is still on the line? Sam, did you hear that question? I suspect you probably have a good answer. Better one than me.
Sure. Phil, could you just reiterate quickly?
Yep.
Emily is essentially asking about task 4 of phase 2, where we talked about bicycle comfort level, and we talked about the roadway evaluation criteria, how we will be asking folks to talk about their comfort level on the road, and how that fits in with bicycle level of service.
Yeah, so I can't remember if it's phase 3 or 4 you talked about it, but there's a distinction between when you're looking at vehicular level of service and when you're thinking about the bicyclist as a design target. And so I just thought that's an important part of information for people who are participating in the project to understand a little bit more.
Did you get that, Sam?
Yeah, I'll try to take a stab at it, and if you have additional, if you need additional clarification, please let me know. But you bring up a good point that there's different level of service models which we can use, and some are oriented towards vehicles. In this particular instance, we will be looking at a methodology to assess the level of comfort. Sorry, if everyone could please mute themselves.
Let's me use it.
Okay.
I think there was
so what we look at in this particular effort is a model, which is still under development, and we're in the preliminary stages, but we're going to look at different roadway variables which are known to influence comfort levels for bicyclists, and that could include different roadway variables such as speed, number of travel lanes, presence or absence of a shoulder. And there are different methodologies out there, and for some of those more technically savvy, there's one called bicycle level of service. There's also a model called level of traffic stress, and that is really becoming the state of the practice. And what different jurisdictions are actually doing is modifying that model for local use. So again, this is all preliminary. We just wanted to present some of the potential evaluation criteria, but in the coming months we will be refining that model, and we're going to be leaning on the public to actually have a survey which is going to go out, and people are going to have the opportunity to vote and to provide input on different evaluation criteria. And we are going to bring that back, and it's going to influence the model so that it's really calibrated well for the state of Vermont. The bicyclists in the state of Vermont know the roads best, and so we're going to lean on you to determine what are the most important variables.
Anyone else here? And thank you, Emily. Yeah. Anyone else in Montpelier have a question or comment? Great, thank you. We're going to go back to Middlebury, and we have a question.
Yeah, their first question.
Middlebury's first question is, will VTrans consider prioritizing Addison County hub-town connections between VTrans, Bristol, and Middlebury, which would include routes 7, 17, and 116. In the context of what? I guess we need some clarification on the question.
And that's really what phase 1 of the project did.
Right.
Right? When we've got the 3 tiers for the whole state network based on the whole methodology and public input and everything that we did in phase 1. I don't know how else to answer that question.
Okay, the clarification is in the context of anticipated higher use.
So that was covered in phase 1.
Right. And as Kevin said when he was addressing an earlier question, this isn't going to be a static effort. We're going to be going through and making changes and reevaluating this periodically. So this is where we're starting from. That doesn't mean that necessarily we're going to be in 10 years or 5 years for that matter. So it's an iterative process. We had to start somewhere, and this is where we're starting. And the phase 1 map is static because it's feeding into phase 2. Yeah. Right now. For now.
There's a second Middlebury question.
What about prioritizing full state loop, i.e. Route 7 VTrans to Middlebury and Route 30 Orwell to Castleton?
Well, I would say for all those roadways, we'll have to see how the evaluation comes out and how we score those roadways. So it's not necessarily a bad idea, and that's certainly not to say that there may not be ultimately improvements along that loop. But that's part of what we'll be doing moving forward in Task 4, is to determine where the gaps may lie along that loop, which would inform where improvements may occur further on in phase 3.
If they're high use.
Yes, assuming that they're high use corridors and state roadways.
Thank you. Next, we're going to take questions from Rutland.
Hi, my name is Steve Dardek, and I have a question and follow-up to the stated concern about high volume of traffic on roads with little or no shoulders. And looking at the map that I have in front of me, the VTrans map, I mean, the main east-west road heading east out of Rutland is Route 4, which is high density until it gets to Mendon and moderate, according to the map. And that road in many locations, if not most locations, has little or no shoulder. There was a near fatality, I assume it's in your second category, which I think had about 13% of incapacitating injury last year on that road, where a bicyclist heading east was hit from behind by a car also traveling east. And what I'm wondering is whether or not there's any room for consideration in your plans for signs which alert motorists to keep a safe distance from bicyclists, which many don't do. Particularly, that road, for example, is used by 18-wheelers, which go by at a high rate of speed, and if they're hugging the right fog lane, which they sometimes do, the force of that wind will actually move the bicycle a bit. And it would be helpful to have a sign, I think, advising motorists, truckers, and drivers of vehicles as well, that a safe distance is required by Vermont law. I saw such a sign when I was biking in Quebec this summer, which I'd like to send to your website if you'd be willing to take a look at it, and if that's within the scope of your study.
I'll let John Kaplan answer that.
All right, that's a good question, and it comes up pretty frequently. I guess, you know, we've tried to approach the sort of the safe passing law requirements more through education and not try to do that education through the use of signs. There is a lot of, you know, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of signs out there that motorists already are not looking at. And I've seen some, you know, national discussion that I haven't seen anything that really indicates that signs are a good solution to driver behavior. And it's kind of a little bit of a slippery slope. Then do we start putting up signs that say, that start going into the other traffic laws? And so we're trying to use signs in a strategic way. We don't have plans to do what you're suggesting. Like I said, we've been trying to address that more through education, some of the other safety efforts in terms of like working with law enforcement to make sure they understand bike laws and things like that.
Great. Mike?
Hi there. Actually, Steve would like to follow up too. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Kit.
So, what specific education efforts are you undertaking with respect to motorists as opposed to law enforcement?
I guess rather than taking up more time in this meeting, if you can send that question in to the email, we'll get you a specific answer about that, because it's not a short answer to that question.
An additional question, Kit?
Yes, we have one additional.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Rick, and I am a resident in Proctor, Vermont. And referencing this map that was spoken to earlier, and addressing what Middlebury and the Northeast Kingdom had to say about the gap and the priority of being a traveler on bicycle long distance, it would be really nice to see in the plan incorporated this idea of the recreational bicyclists that are traveling north-south, such as on the corridor that parallels the Long Trail, that there is a priority from the beginning of the state to the end of the state, as well as traveling east-west between New York and New Hampshire, of a consistent signage or an education process where we are sharing with the road other than with the local residents of Vermont to encourage people to utilize our recreation areas. And in that same idea, being a resident of Proctor and having recreational areas within our town and trying to connect our town with the local towns around us, it would be terrific to make it a priority. Route 3, which is a nice, comfortable cycling road, but would also allow our employees that travel to the neighboring towns to have a consistent way of acknowledging that there are cyclists on the road and that we are sharing the road, in fact. So making Route 3 a priority as far as being able to bypass Route 7 in a comfortable way in our particular region would be an excellent service to the community in our area. So I'll leave it at that, and whatever comments you have to say.
So this is John Kaplan again. And I think, Sam or Erica might be able to chime in a little bit because a lot of what you talked about in terms of recreation, routes was a consideration during phase 1. I mean, that was part of input that resulted in the tiered priorities that we have. I don't think that the state has any plans to. It's hard to get into like signing certain roads for bicycling. We kind of are taking the other, the assumption that we have is that all the roads in the state are open to bicycling other than, limited access roads like the interstate. And, we haven't gone down the path of, signing a particular road for biking
partly because we don't want to send a message that, only that road is okay for biking. I think there could be some misunderstanding by motorists that, they see someone on a road that isn't signed for biking and they say, well, how come you're not using the bike route? So, that's not a detailed answer to your question, and I guess, we might be able to offer more on that. So I'd say follow up.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to. Okay, we're going to move on to Doug in St. Johnsbury.
So we do not have any comments or questions at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Victoria and Woodstock?
We're all set here.
Thank you. Brian and Winooski, do you still have the two that would like to speak?
We have a couple, and we may have a couple more later, but we'll start with the first one now.
Yeah.
I'm Roy Newer, South Burlington, and I have several questions. First one is, what were the criteria that determined feasibility, low, medium, or high?
Use priority. The blue, green, and yellow on the map.
Yes.
So that determination occurred during phase 1, and that was based on the method explained at the beginning, where we estimated both current and potential bicycle use on state roadways based on transportation bicycle use and recreation bicycle use. So that part was established during phase 1. We're now using that information to structure the phase 2 analysis.
And use was determined by land density, a interactive crowdsourcing map that people were designated where they would like to ride, where they did ride, where they would ride if it was improved. And we had a robust sort of quantitative method of determining use. Next question.
My other question is, the last time I looked at state accident reports, the format really did not provide a lot of required information with regard to bicycle motor vehicle crashes. It was left up for, basically to the investigating officer's comments per area. So I'm wondering if you're looking at accident reports, you're really getting sufficient data, or perhaps you have already made some input to the Department of Transportation about the accident reports.
This is Erica Wygonic with RSG. We read all of the crash narratives. So VTrans keeps a fairly robust database of crashes, and I think from 2010 that information is online now and is electronic, along with the crash reports themselves. Due to some of the issues that you're identifying, where the crash reports are not necessarily as detailed as we would hope for bicycle crashes, one of the key aspects of this project was going and reading all of the officer narratives for all of these crashes to try and make sure any of the subtleties that aren't necessarily captured in the various crash codes were noted. Obviously, there's not every aspect of every crash will be documented, but I think we were able to get pretty good information to understand the overall theme of the various crashes based on those officer narratives.
Yeah, okay. My third question is with respect to the standard 11-foot motor lane. I can understand that this is traditional, but I wonder, have we ever considered, at least in some areas, putting the fog line at 10 feet? Even though it would be okay to have it 11, but the 10-foot fog line would have 3 advantages that I can think of. A psychological one for the motorist, it's a tendency for traffic calming. Road looks narrower, looks like it's a lower speed situation, and it would help with respect to keeping clearance from a bicyclist, since the tendency would be for the motor vehicle to ride closer to the center line. And the third advantage is it reduces the wear and tear on the side edge of the road, less tendency to veer over to the edge. So have 10-foot lanes ever been considered? At least 10-foot marked lanes?
The short answer to that is yes. We have had instances where we are or will be applying 10-foot lanes. So we look at a lot of factors. You mentioned a few, but we look at traffic, trucks, speed, all those things play into that decision. But it definitely is something that is looked at and can be looked at in the future.
Yep. Thank you, Rick. Moving on to the web stream.
Oops. Can we ask one more over here?
Okay. We'll do 2 people.
Thank you. Here's the second person. My name is Rick Hubbard, and I live in South Burlington. It's a question primarily for Kevin Marcia. Are you able to hear it, Kevin? Is Kevin aboard?
I am unsure. He is not a designated panelist, and he is.
I'm here, Summer.
Okay. Thanks,
Okay.
Kevin.
Kevin, I want to speak to really what's the elephant in the room here that we're not discussing too directly, and that's road width. If we're going to have safe transportation for vehicles and bicycles, we have to approach the issue of separating bicycles at slower speeds from speeding motorists, and there has to be safe separation. And except for roads like the improved portions of Route 7 and some others, Vermont has a huge percentage of roads that are 28 feet or less, as I understand it. And the math, I can simply not make the math work to safely separate bicycles and roads on the majority of all Vermont highways. And until we address that and begin to have a plan to push it out to a wide enough distance to have safe separation, I don't see that we're going to do anything but repeat these conversations out into the future. And we need a plan over how many years, because we can't do it all at once, that it's going to take us. And I'd like to give you an example, and I'm happy to follow up in the morning. I have your phone number and email, and I'd be happy to send you some diagrams that I put together to illustrate it and to chat in more depth. But the one example I'd give you is this. It's typical for 2 SUVs or pickup trucks or panel trucks to pass each other on Vermont roads. They make up 40+% of all the vehicles on our highways. And if you're going to have safe separation for those 2 plus bicycles, the panel truck or the pickup side view mirror to mirror is 8 feet. I've measured. Times 2 in opposite directions at 50 miles an hour with a 4-foot separation gap between the oncoming vehicles. You've used up 20 feet. If you allow 4 feet of separation between the side view mirrors of each vehicle and the bicyclist, you've used up the entire 28 feet of pavement. You haven't allowed any room for the bicyclist, 2 of them at 2 feet each, and then that would bring you up to 32 feet. And the bicyclist now is riding right on the edge of the pavement, which isn't realistic. If you allow another 2 feet on either side of the bicyclist for wiggle room, you're up to 36 feet. And so we are way out of phase with what I can see to make the math work. And I just like to understand when we're talking about changing lanes down to 11-foot lanes, but not dramatically widening the roads beyond 28 feet, how we're ever going to make the roads safe enough for bicyclists and vehicles.
Thank you, Rick. I think it's been the 2 minutes allocated. Kevin, do you have a quick answer for that, or is it something that
Sure.
we
I'll do my best real quick, Summer. And Rick, I think you and I maybe have discussed this in the past. It really comes down to resources. You know, I don't think, you know, in general, when it comes to VTrans and widening roadways, there's a couple of things to widen the roadway. In many cases, you're talking about basically more of a reconstruction to get that base out there and that width. So there's a substantial cost component to it. The other component that we have is looking at acquiring private property. Many of the roads we have, there's a 50-foot right-of-way. You start taking that 30 feet and you have slopes and ditches and those things. We're out at the right-of-way, so there's a lot of private property takings. And then the other piece is just the environmental impact that you have as well. So I'm certainly not disagreeing. Wider would be better. Our approach is to try to incrementally get wider roads, but you're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars if we were going to get separation at 36 or 40-foot roads everywhere in the state. Hundreds of millions. It's more than that probably. So at this point, and the purpose of this study is to really to help prioritize so that we can try to get that width as much as we can around the, but recognizing we're not going to be able to do everything. So I know that may seem like we're selling ourselves a bit short, but certainly what we're trying to do is get the best we can within the financial resource that we have available to us now and we project to have available to us in the relatively near future.
Thank you, Kevin. We're moving on to the web stream.
We have a question from Norm Staunton. He is there any accident evidence that suggests a correlation between intersections of bike paths or other non-motorized paths and accidents?
Hi, Norm. This is Erica Wygonick from RSG. We have looked at the crash data in detail as part of the hotspot analysis. That does not cover all of the intersections with bike paths and that sort of thing. There is some evidence that when there's network disconnect, that there may be potential for increased crash rates. It's certainly not something that we've looked at in any sort of scientific or comprehensive way. But I would say that making sure that there is good connectivity between bicycle infrastructure is a good way to minimize crash risk.
Thank you, Erica.
And Jim Rivas has a comment. He wants to point out that spring sweeping is not enough. After every rainstorm, large boulders, sand, and gravel are appearing on the shoulder. And he also states that lane marking seems to get done in the late summer, way too late to be of much use to cyclists.
Okay. We're going to go back to Brattleboro, where there's 2 more questions. Erica and Brattleboro, do you still have 2 questions? We lost Erica and Brattleboro. Going back to Middlebury.
Question 3 online was, what about road wearing due to road diets and possible pushback from local highway departments and road foremen? I think the question is if maintenance changes because of road diets. Is there any pushback?
Well, I can take a first stab at that, and John can jump in as well. It's obviously a conversation that we have to have up front. Our most recent one is state maintained, so that's our forces, so we have those conversations. And we're still trying to figure out, the best ways to keep those lines up to date and updated so that it serves its purpose. It is a challenge to get everybody on board and work through those issues, but it can be done, and the Barry Montpelier Road is a good example of that.
Thank you. Is there another question in Middlebury?
There is another question in Middlebury. Middlebury's question 4 is, I understand that for the purposes of this project, VTrans felt the need to constrain the scope of roads considered to only state roads. Given that the overall goal of the project is a statewide network of roadways usable by bicyclists, it would make sense to give weight to state road segments that connect to lower traffic local roads that are often preferred by cyclists. Similarly, I hope that problem areas on state highways can factor into increased VTrans funding to communities so that they might better develop local road connections and bypasses around constrained portions of state roads.
During our wiki map, we asked folks to include loops that had state roads specifically as part of their loops, but local roads was an okay component. And in that way, we tried to capture the parts of the state highway that were an important part of local road loops. Moving on back to Montpelier, no questions, correct? Okay. Did we have any more questions in Rutland?
Go for it. Hi, my name is Marty. I'm a member of the Transportation Advisory Council here in Rutland. And none of the members that I'm aware of, and there's about 30 of us that come on a consistent basis, none of us are professional engineers. So of course this is not scientific. It's just common observation. As operators of motor vehicles, and we've come across bicyclists in the road, we realize that these bicyclists that have small narrow tires can't ride where there's a lot of stones and rocks, so they wind up in the traveled portion of the roadway. I understand you're doing a study for big improvements, but on a more immediate application, that if we could do more road sweeping to keep the shoulders clean, the bicyclists will be able to ride safely more to the right than they're able to now. So we would appreciate that if the state highway in the middle of different chores that they have to do, if they'd be able to get the power brooms out and clean the shoulders. Thank you.
Thank you. As Kevin stated at the beginning of the presentation, we're using the priority bicycle map to have that be part of our sweeping each spring. Was there another question in Rutland?
Yeah, it's just one.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, this is Gail. I just have a question. I just thought of it as I was looking at the map and listening to other questions. Is the Vermont Scenic Highways or Byways program under VTrans?
No, it is not.
Tourism and marketing.
Tourism and marketing.
Okay. Well, apparently they have a good bit of signage out there marking those road beds. And normally those are the less heavily traveled by motor vehicles. And some of them might well render themselves as being marked on the same post that mark them as highways and byways with a notice that they're also bike friendly or bike comfortable or whatever the terminology is. So I was just wondering if that would be something that apparently it does not sound like it is unitized, but you might have to work with another group there at the state level. But it's just something that I thought that might be a good marriage of signage and road use that says the same thing. Enjoy yourself.
All right, well, thank you for your comment. Moving on to Winooski.
Yep, we do have one more.
Hey.
Second. All right.
Yes, this just relates, I know there was some mention in the accident reports about bicycling at night and with lights and things like that. But I wondered, since the state highways tend to be better lit than other roads, if there's input into this report, the issue of, you know, a lot of people this time of year, and I witnessed 3 of them tonight just on my way here, bicycling home from work, or, you know, they're bicycling in the dark on roads that are very ill lit, and some of them have lights and some not so much, just reflectors and things. So I'd like to see that incorporated as part of the report, you know, just the prevalence of bicycling at night on roadways.
Or people driving at night too without lights on, and it'd be nice if there was step up in law enforcement there.
Will you state your name, please?
Oh, this is Donna Laban.
Thank you.
From South Burlington. So it was between South Burlington and Winooski that I experienced this 3 times just tonight. People riding on the roads with or without lights, but certainly not that easily seen.
Okay, thank you for your comment. That is part of our education material.
Right, as far as bikes use.
As far as bicycles using lights, and then also that was one of the general themes that was found during our hotspot analysis. Yep. The proper equipment of bicyclists. Thank you for your comment. We'll take 2 from the web stream.
Okay, do we have an opportunity for a second one here in Winooski?
Sure. I lost track. Yeah. Yeah.
Blooper Z, I'll make it quick. Just a comment for the previous questionnaire. Don't laugh, it will be quick. The scenic byways, they are not low-traveled roads all across the state. As a matter of fact, I've been involved with those, and most of them are very heavily traveled roads.
Oh, thank you. That was quick. And a good clarification. Amy, web stream?
Yeah, we have a question, another question from Norm Staunton. Has any thought gone into planning for non-traditional cyclists? I'm thinking of hand cyclists, recumbents, tandems, etc., particularly cyclists with disabilities. If not, might the survey and other feedback mechanisms be an appropriate method for offering some accessibility and safety inputs?
Great question.
Well, looking at
Yeah, I know.
Well, I could just jump in and say, this is Phil from Alta Planning, and to say that, you know, good bicycle planning improves safety for everyone who's, you know, using a bicycle or a tricycle or a hand trike, recumbent, if you have a trailer, if you have children. You know, it's difficult to achieve sort of the perfect ideal. As Kevin stated before, the VTrans is working, but it's not so easy to provide separated facilities everywhere, which, you know, provides more space for those, you know, wider pedal vehicles. But the improvements we're looking at ultimately will impact positively cyclists no matter what type of bike or trike that they're using.
Thank you, Phil. Amy?
I have one more from Benjamin Jocelyn. How does the state plan to integrate planning of an on-road / street bicycle facilities and off-road ones such as trails and paths? How do we plan to integrate on-road and off-road bicycling plans? Basically what he's asking, to bring them together.
I think that's just a byproduct of our map, in the sense of where there are folks bicycling on the road to get to mountain biking that hopefully came up as high use on our map. And they will be accommodated just as all other cyclists that are using the state road.
The only thing I would add to that is that, you know, some of that will happen at the local level because there's a lot of trail or path development that happens outside of VTrans. So, you know, it'll be somewhat dependent on municipalities to be aware of our network and then tie their facilities into ours.
Correct. Thank you, John. We have time.
Yep, we have someone here. Okay.
Oh, great. We have a question in Montpelier. Wait.
Over here.
You want to
Oh.
stand here and answer
Yeah,
my
there you
question?
go. This is our last question.
Okay, my name is Stephanie Kaplan. I'm not related to John. I live in Calais, and I was a founding member of the Bike Ped Coalition, and I was on the very first, with Amy, on the very first Bike Ped committee here at VTrans. And we wrote that bike plan, the Bike Ped plan, that first one. And back then, I want to talk about shoulders just for a second. Back then, we talked a lot, there was a lot of controversy about what's the ideal shoulder width for a bicycle. Because you have the conflict between wanting it nice and wide and then not really ruining the rural character of roads. And the nice, you know, you have shade along them when you have trees and everything else. I'm just wondering, I'm just curious, sort of at this point in 2016, is there a position, does VTrans, do you guys have a position on what is sort of the ideal shoulder width for bicycles?
That's part of the evaluation criteria for task 3, looking at what are the, thinking about what the criteria is to evaluate how comfortable a roadway is given the user of that road. And
You don't have something, you don't have like,
well, there is the Vermont.
Right, and we also, in our VTrans bike and pedestrian design manual, we say that in general, 3 feet is the minimum for a shoulder that, you know, can accommodate, I don't know what words we use, you know, most bicyclists or some level of bicyclists.
so when reconstruction is going on, what numbers go into the planning, or does it totally depend upon where you are?
It does totally depend on where we are.
Do you have an
As
ideal?
Kevin mentioned, we don't have a lot of reconstruction.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, yeah, you know, paving, maintenance type projects where we're doing our best to get what width we can within the limits of those projects. When I say limits, I mean, you know, minimizing right-of-way acquisition, minimizing permitting, so that we can actually build the project in a reasonable time. So we're trying to maximize that width. On our paving jobs, we're shooting for that 3, but we're trying to get that 4. But it is constrained in a lot of cases, and that's really, I think, one of the goals that I see coming out of this is to really get a feel for those systematic improvements that we can apply in all jobs, not just high-use corridors, but everything, where we can truly start to make some improvements across the system.
Okay, so you don't, you know, that's helpful to know. I mean, you don't like, because it was a big controversy. You know, do we want 3 feet? You know, and once you start getting bigger, you really are affecting the quality of.
Well, I think just one quick thing. I mean, Kevin mentioned it early on that there's some roads that have a very low volume where you probably don't need to add any shoulder.
Exactly.
And just having a good surface would be enough.
But, you know, living in Calais and sometimes wanting to go to Montpelier on Route 14, it's very difficult. And getting to Barrie is even worse. I mean, you can't, you know, and I'm not a timid cyclist, but they're not good roads. Anyway.
All right, well, thank you for the comment. We've reached 7:55, which is our closing time for the meeting. If you are unable to get your comment today, we encourage you to submit them in writing. The contact information is either contained in a handout at the RPC site and is also projected here. Again, the email is vermontbike@gmail.com. And there's also the website available to you that includes a mailing address, if that's your preference, of ways to submit comments. And as a reminder, additional written comments will be received for this phase of this project until December 16th. And I thank you, and I hope you have a good evening and safe travels.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Thank you to our PC staff. Thank you to our